And as Nathaniel and I were discussing earlier, now there's also access to tutoring for kids in out-of-home care that was a recent announcement by the state government. What we would like to see is similar investments made in P12 to support students who are disadvantaged and in out-of-home care, as well as post-secondary education. And more investment to promote more opportunities in TAFE and university. And we love our Raising Expectations program. We think it does excellent things, but we need to see that funded and also grow. The centre is leading several education programs at different age groups and levels. Early Start Bright Future focuses on building the capacity of the Child and Family Services workforce so they can better understand, prioritise and navigate the complex early years system. A more confident workforce can empower children and families to access and participate in crucial early years services. This project has a particular focus on supporting enrolment and engagement in 2 years of quality kinder, which evidence shows has a powerful effect on future academic and social outcomes. The out-of-home care education project focuses on building the skills of carers and workers to help engage and re-engage young people in care with education. Partnering with VACA and the Young Persons Alliance and Lookout, the project's main goal is to promote the out-of-home care's partnering agreement, which is a commitment by DFFH, the Department of Education, the Catholic Education Commission of Victoria, independent schools, VACA and the Centre. I mentioned earlier, the Centre's Raising Expectations program supports young people with an out-of-home care experience to access and thrive in post-secondary education. We know that not enough care experienced young people are supported to pursue post-secondary education, and historically there has been a culture of low expectations placed on young care. Raising Expectations has worked to change this, with many young people now accessing TAFE and universities through our partnerships with providers across Victoria. Raising Expectations provides on-the-ground support to care experienced students, including opportunities for financial support. So this series will feature a range of different programs and research that showcase pretty phenomenal outcomes. Raising Expectations will host a couple of the sessions, and the first will be a panel discussion with several peer mentoring programs with support students who experience educational disadvantage, and finally a session talking directly with care experienced students about their education journey, reflecting on the challenges and what supports did and could have improved their experiences. But today, we have Dr. Matthew Harrison presenting on his program for young people with neurodiversity, with Game on Collaborative Learning. This is going to be really interesting. As well as Yvonne Lindros, Education and Wellbeing Leader and Deputy Principal, the MacKillop Institute, presenting on MacKillop's successful Relate program, aiming at creating cultural change in school by providing a trauma lens to education. So I might talk a little bit about the issue. Here is what we know about children and young people who are disadvantaged in their education. We know that early years are crucial to a child's education outcomes because 90% of a child's brain develops before the age of 5. There is no doubt that what happens in this sensitive period of development matters. Our challenge in the early years is the knowledge that children who experience vulnerability are the least likely to access early education, which is why I talked about the project that we are running earlier on. The Australian Early Development Census figures show that around 1 in 5 starting school are not prepared socially or emotionally for the school environment, with children who experience social economic disadvantage being twice as likely to be developmentally vulnerable. In addition to economic disparities, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and children who are not confident in English also experience higher rates of developmental vulnerability. And when children start school without the skills to support successful transition, they are not only behind, but quite often stay behind their peers, academically and socially. We know that substantially lower academic outcomes are strong and consistent factors when linked to socioeconomic disadvantage. We know that there are gaps in educational opportunities and outcomes and are apparent from school entry and often persist through the adulthood for socio-economically disadvantaged students. They're also less likely to have attended preschool and less likely to have been developmentally ready for school. So we know a lot of these gaps now, and our job is to, in our own sector actually, is to try and bridge those gaps. Young people are telling us that they would like to be empowered in their education and consulted with what with everything actually that relates to their education, and they feel that they currently don't have a voice. They often feel disempowered in their education because they are not able to articulate their needs, concerns about their schooling in the right forums. Young people are telling us that they know they are disadvantaged in this way, particularly in mainstream settings. And as one person stated that to pay $6 for a school excursion was unaffordable, so they could not go on that excursion. And we hear these stories often. This is the kind of story we consistently hear and see when it comes to those students who experience disadvantage in education. So we're hoping that this webinar series about innovation in education and rethinking what education can be for our most disadvantaged kids, showcasing programs and projects from early years, school-age children and young people to post-secondary school leavers is an exciting opportunity that we all need to discuss. So if you have any questions along the way, please pop them in the chat. We want to make sure we get your questions answered. And I'd have to say that this is being recorded. So if you haven't been able to get to this session, you'll still be able to watch it. And I half suspect when we get to hear both of our speakers, we're going to want to have them back again and again, because I think that there is no doubt that Nathan has uncovered two remarkable speakers on this subject. So in terms of our first speaker, Dr. Matthew Harrison, he's an experienced teacher, researcher and digital creator with a keen passion for utilising technology to enhance social capacity building, belonging and inclusion in education. He's taught in Australia, South Korea and the United Kingdom at primary, secondary and tertiary levels. Matthew is currently a member of the Learning Intervention Team and is the Director of Professional and Continuing Education at the University of Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone. I'll just begin just the acknowledgement of country and just pay my respects to elders, to all elders past, present and emerging, just to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and to acknowledge that we all have a collective responsibility to address past injustices. It's really nice to see the yes backgrounds. That's very exciting to see. And hopefully everything goes well next weekend. Thank you, Deborah, for the introduction. So I won't spend too much time on explaining who I am. But just my background, I'm a teacher. I've been very fortunate. I've been able to work with kids right from foundation right through to year 12. My areas of research and interest as an academic are really around neurodiversity. I'm going to explain what that means later on in this presentation, digital technologies and inclusive education, and how we can make sure that every young person gets what they need, not just to be academically included, but also socially included in our school system. I'm very fortunate that I get to work with a lot of researchers and academics right across the University of Melbourne Faculty of Education in my role as Director of Professional and Continuing Education. I'm also really fortunate to be able to work with Digital Learning and Teaching Victoria. I serve as the Vice President. That's a wonderful professional association. If there's any teachers who have questions about how to teach with technology, DLTV, or Digital Learning Teaching Victoria, is the professional association for Digitech teachers. I'm also a massive nerd. I love games, proudly so. I've just had PAX this past weekend. If you're not aware, PAX is the massive gaming festival we have in Melbourne, Melbourne International Games Week. And my favourite game, because I always get asked, is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, which came out this year. So in this session, I'm just going to give a quick overview of particularly autism and inclusion and this shift towards understanding a broader umbrella of neurodiversity. And then I'm going to really focus in on my research and the social enterprise that I've been fortunate enough to have been able to co-found through the University of Melbourne next level collaboration, and really talk about how we're using digital games to build social capacity in young people. I'll touch briefly on the challenges, the real and perceived, that I hear from teachers and educators more broadly across our schooling systems. And then I'll hopefully have some resources for you at the end to share. All in 20 minutes, Nathaniel. Let's see, I've got my timer on, ready to go. So my interest in this field, it really comes back from myself and my brother and our neighborhood and our friends growing up. There's myself with a very fetching bowl cut when I was 8 years old. When I became a teacher, I thought back to when I was growing up. I thought, how did I develop a lot of my social capabilities, like skills like taking turns and teamwork and integrating verbal and non-verbal communication, so things like pointing. And a lot of it was really around playing games with my younger brother, who's now 6 foot something. He's on the right-hand side of that photo. And the other kids in our neighborhood used to come over and play our old 286 computer together. We only had one keyboard, but so we had to develop these complex systems for determining whose turn it was, fairness, different roles within the team. And really, when I first started working with children who required additional support around interactions with their peers, it was really this idea of how we could, leverage this strength and interest of many people in gaming as a way of building social capacity, but also developing a sense of belonging and really acknowledging people's strength and interest in gaming. So I've been really lucky. I work with Jess Rawlings, who's shown in this photo, and Jess is a speech and language pathologist. She's a researcher, and she has a lived experience being neurodivergent. And I wouldn't have been able to do any of my work without Jess. She's a woman who's actually autistic and has been a real leader within our University of Melbourne community for autistic and researchers with ADHD to be able to become a full part of our university community. So working with Jess, we're able to co-found Next Level Collaboration, which I'll introduce later in this presentation. Just to give you the elevator pitch, so to speak, is we run gaming groups for neurodivergent children and young adults using cooperative video games where players have to work together to build social capacity, to develop leadership skills, but also to create a sense of community and belonging. And our social mission is to help adults who are autistic or have ADHD and to train them up to run our programs. That's really what we're about, is a community-led program. So I just wanted to begin just really quickly to introduce what we mean by autism, what we mean by neurodiversity. And my thinking around this has shifted dramatically since when I first started my teaching career. My understanding has developed a lot. And that's because the research has changed. What we're focused on has changed. So when I first started teaching, there's a young photo of myself here without any grays in 2007. It's my first school photo, I think, as a teacher. It's really this idea of autism as being deficits to fix. Now, we know that there's been some big changes in how we understand autism, and that means our roles as educators has changed as well. So rather than seeing autism as children having these deficits that we need to fix, we now see conceptualize autism as differences, like cultural differences to celebrate. And our focus is on creating environments that include everyone. So that's a really big shift. Rather than trying to change who the children are, autistic children are, we're really thinking about how we can celebrate their strengths and interests and differences while creating these conditions, these environments where everyone can participate. Yes, there is some skill development. And yes, this involves making sure that we have some interventions in place, but it also means that at the core of what we do is we're trying to remove barriers so everyone can participate. And when Deborah was speaking earlier, that really resonated with me. It's this idea of how we can remove barriers for all kids to be able to receive a high quality education. So if we look at the technical definition, some of the technical definitions or clinical definitions of autism, you can see there's some deficit-based language. Autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. I don't like the word interfering, but it results in differences, manifesting differences with how a person can communicate and how they relate to other people who are neurotypical, people who are not autistic. The DSM-5, the definition that we use primarily in this state, in Victoria, to diagnose people, really, and it's used throughout most of the Western world, focuses on two defining challenges. I like the word differences rather than some of these words. So the idea of differences in social communication and interaction is one of those defining characteristics of autism. There's also this idea of differences in patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So the words impairment and restricted are technically used, but a lot of people in the autistic community prefer just the term differences. It's a bit like a cultural difference. It's something that we want to try to understand and something where possible that we want to accommodate. So when we're talking about social skills, and I like the term collaboration skills, the idea of how we can work together, but these idea of these social capabilities, we really want to think about what really matters and why. So social skills are really grounded within the social context. So in the Australian context, we have one way, the Western normed, way of showing that we're listening. But if we go to other cultures, like some First Nations cultures, if we go to, like when I worked in South Korea, there's differences in how we showed we're listening. There's different norms, social norms. It's the same for the autistic community. There's just some different expectations and norms around how you show someone that you're listening. And so what we really focus on in our programs is this idea of how can we have inclusive social skills, or skills where we focus on the outcome, whether someone's actually listened or not, rather than trying to make everyone show or use these skills in the same way. So in a very Western context, eye contact is common. We show that we're listening by showing eye contact. But a lot of our participants who are autistic find eye contact really uncomfortable. So we'll find alternative ways for them to show that they're listening. So we really want to focus on what are these really outcome-focused social capabilities that we need to have every child develop, but how can we teach them in a way that's flexible enough that people can be themselves and do what's comfortable and responds to their cultural needs in the best possible way. So digital games-based social capability capacity building programs is really my area of research. So how can we use cooperative video games as a way of building these collaborative social skills that are in an inclusive way? So we focus on structured programs, but we still want a lot of student voice or participant voice. We use a lot of visual supports. We have roles for staff, the interventionists, so we're actually teaching these skills at the point of need. We're coaching, and I'll explain that in a second. We also have developed a system that was co-designed with our students to make sure that it meets their needs. And that's really important, that we have this co-design element where students can help shape what we do and why we do it within our program. And the takeaway thing from our programs that I really want people to understand is that the games don't actually teach the students these skills. Teachers teach these social capabilities or these collaborative skills using explicit teaching, but the games create the conditions where the participants can practice the skills, and that's really, really important. Okay, so our program's really based every week on the same 3 stages. We start with our skill instruction in stage A, which focuses on using video modeling and video review. We then coach, we then play games during stage B. But while we're playing the games, our facilitators are coaching the participants. And each session concludes with a guided reflection where we have our participants thinking about how they use their skills, can use these skills in other aspects of their life, and also which skills they think their team used effectively and which ones they didn't. And we use that for goal setting for the following session. That's a really important part of the process. For people who aren't familiar with my work, it can be a little bit confusing what this exactly can look like. So one of our program facilitators is a really clever Lego animator. So I've got a Lego animation to share with you now that will show you exactly what our programs look like. And I think it's pretty cute as well. It's fantastic. So I'll share that now.
Our next level collaboration sessions follow a 3-stage structure that stays the same each week. Having a predictable structure helps us to know what to expect every time we come into a session, so there are no surprises. We begin our sessions by saying hello to our program leader, program assistant, and the other players before getting ready for Stage A. In Stage A, we learn about collaborative skills that are important for everyone to learn, like giving verbal instructions or offering help to others. Different people might show these skills differently, but what's most important is that we can use these skills however works best for us. During Stage A, we also watch a video of our gameplay from the previous week and talk through the skills that we used in our last session. Then, each team member picks one skill as their goal for the week and we can start playing. In Stage B, we practice our collaborative skills by playing a weekly cooperative video game where we have to work together as a team towards a common goal. We play in timed rounds, and between each round we pause to hear feedback about the skills we have used and how they have helped the team succeed. We also take turns doing different jobs in the game between rounds, and if we get stuck, the program leader and program assistant will coach us to work out a solution or find a way we can ask for help if we need it. For Stage C, we do a guided reflection and talk through the skills we have used while playing our game of the week. We share our ideas on what skills the team used well, what skills the team could use more next time, and how we went with our individual goal skills. At the end of the reflection, we celebrate our collaborator of the week and have some time for free play with our teammates. Our families will arrive at the end of the session, and we say goodbye to the program leader, program assistant, and our teammates before heading home.
So that video presented an overview of our programs. And so we run these programs, we train teachers to run these in schools. We also run our own programs after school where people come to the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne. We work directly with young people here. I want to focus on, because this is what I get asked a lot about, is how exactly do you use the games during that Stage B, that play? Because people understand the teaching of the skills in Stage A, and they understand that importance in Stage C of the guided reflection. But Stage B, we will use ongoing cycles, like you can see here, where we'll start playing and we'll play a cooperative game. This is a game where you have to work together as a team, and we'll play for about 8 minutes. While people are playing, we'll actually have our facilitators giving real-time feedback to the players, but we like to let them try at first to to use the skills independently and to actually, try to resolve any issues amongst themselves. So it's the idea of practicing these skills that we've taught in Stage A, putting them into a meaningful context for them and actually practicing these skills. After 8 minutes of play, we'll have a timeout. And the timeout is for 2 minutes. During that 2 minutes, our program leaders will actually give feedback on which skills they've seen everyone using, and also give some feedback on how we could actually use different skills to be successful in the game. It's a chance for our participants also to share what they've observed about how the team's going. It's really, really critical because the research around this is really strong. A lot of kids can tell you to the cows come home a technical definition of negotiation, but it's when actually recognizing when they actually need to use those skills to negotiate an outcome and to be able to really regulate themselves, that's when they really find it difficult. So this gives a meaningful context. So we have ongoing cycles of 8 minutes of play, 2 minutes of feedback, 8 minutes of play, 2 minutes of feedback. People also ask, what sort of skills do we focus on? So we say, what are collaborative skills that are inclusive look like? So it's things like sharing task information. There's lots of different ways you can share task information. We provide mini whiteboards. We allow people to be able to use their alternative and augmented communication devices, pointing, as well as verbal communication. We teach skills like encouraging, saying, how can you encourage someone, particularly when the team isn't successful? What can taking turns look like? What are the different ways we can take turns? How can we check for understanding? What are the different ways we can give non-verbal instructions? We focus on 25 different collaborative skills. As people are playing, our program facilitators are using their goal and skill performance chart to be able to track which skills people are using. It's not a competition, so we only have 4 boxes, but these visualizations of the skills really help some of our participants to understand what skills we've seen them using. And during the timeout, we refer back to this sticker chart. You can see where it says my goal skill. At the end of stage A, we ask the players to choose which skill do they really want to focus on. And what I've been really impressed with is the maturity of a lot of our participants in really identifying in their lives which skill will be the most meaningful for them to be able to become more effective in collaborating with others. We use a visual activity schedule to structure our programs so people know what's happening now, what's happening next. We use a lot of timers so people know how long we're going to be playing for, how long the feedback session will be running for. We use those mini whiteboards to provide a way for people to draw things out. Sometimes when students are really frustrated, participants are really frustrated, they need to be able to visually communicate. That's really, really important for all young people, to be able to find different channels for them to be able to communicate. We also have on our whiteboards a break card. When someone recognizes they're becoming really frustrated, they want a break. Sometimes they can't find the words, or sometimes they don't want to ask verbally in front of other people. So they'll use a break card. A timeout card is just when things are happening too quickly and they need more processing time. Or a help card. A lot of young people don't know how to ask for help. So having a help card and teaching them to use that and explaining that it's always okay to use a help card. I'd love to see these 3 cards in every classroom for every student in Australia. And finally, just some challenges that I hear from teachers who are interested in running digital games-based support programs. There's questions around the research. So if you would like to reach out to me, and I'll show you some resources around this, around the research around how we can use games effectively, I can point you in the right direction. If you'd like to reach out, I'll share my details at the end. There's concerns around violence in games, and it's really important that teachers understand that there's lots of different games, lots of different audiences. So we want to make sure that when we're communicating with families and other teachers and school leaders, that we're focusing on age-appropriate, teamwork-focused games. Because some people don't have an understanding of the breadth of games available, and that there are games that are designed specifically for children and young adults, and there's games designed for adults. And of course, as educators or program facilitators, we want to make sure that we're using age-appropriate games. The last thing's the cost. And there's lots of things we can also do to use secondhand hardware we don't need to use the latest systems. There's lots of older systems that have wonderful collaborative games. It's really making sure that people understand that you don't have to have the most expensive equipment to begin this sort of program. So where are we at and where's next? We have launched our programs at the University of Melbourne. We have a lot of young people coming here for a lot of different reasons, which is really exciting. We currently employ 9 adults with experiences of neurodivergence to run our programs, which is really exciting in terms of our social mission. And we are looking to train up teachers in as many schools as possible. We have a lot of interest from schools around Australia, which is fantastic. If you'd like to learn more, here's a link. I wrote a book that's designed to be able to help people to be able to understand in more detail how they can run this in their school or clinic or setting. And we also have the sign up here, which I can share later on in the chat for our school training program. We're really focused on getting it out to schools and to other spaces rather than charging through the nose for it. We just wanted to get it out there because we really believe this program will make a difference in the lives of young people in feeling like they belong to their community, as well as building those those social capabilities. But reach out if you have any questions. I think I'm right on time, 20 minutes there, Nathaniel. But there's my contact details. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for having me to speak about a topic that's, you know, a big passion of mine. So my name's Yvonne, and today I'm really wanting to speak about cultural change and the journey that we've been through the lens of trauma-informed practice, but then also how we're now starting to bring that out to other schools across Australia as well. Before I do start, I do also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all stand today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, traditions, cultures, hopes and aspirations for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I want to recognise too that all of our lands have been the lands of learning and teaching since the beginning of time. We stand with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in solidarity now and always, and hopeful that this weekend will result in a change that ensures a greater voice for them across the nation. So I'm joining this from Wadawurrung country, and if you're able to, please feel free to share in the chat the country that you're joining from today. That would be great, so we can see how far we are spanning across this beautiful nation. In terms of this weekend, certainly we'll be voting yes too. I think we've come a long way culturally from, I guess, the practice of, you know, creating things like boundary roads to segregate the Aboriginal people from the European settlers. So with that trajectory in mind, very hopeful for a positive outcome this weekend. So to start off with, I guess, and a beautiful introduction as well. Thank you, Deb. So we're a part of MacKillop Family Services. So MacKillop Family Services obviously providing out-of-home care support and family support to families all over Australia. And additionally also through that disability lens, as well as early intervention for families and education as well across the country. And within MacKillop Family Services, we also have the MacKillop Education and the MacKillop Institute. So MacKillop Education provides, I guess, outreach programs to children across Victoria through numerous different focuses for disengaged students. But also we have 3 campuses in Victoria and soon to grow into other states as well, which is very exciting because there's a lot of need for alternative education settings. So our campus in Geelong is where I spent most of my years, the last 9.5 years. We have 80 students from foundation to year 12. Many of whom are within the out-of-home care sector, a lot of whom also experience a lot of kind of dysfunction and challenge within their family environments as well. We do also have a high percentage of neurodiverse students, so lots of students with autism and ADHD. And many also come to us with learning difficulties and also some really big gaps in their learning for lots of different reasons. We see a lot of kind of mental health challenges, so those tier 3 and 4 high-level challenges that we're working very closely and collaboratively with mental health organisations to support those students to access education. A lot of school refusal, especially since COVID, unfortunately. But I guess to sum up, all of our students really present with a really quite high level of social and emotional difficulty. And disability, I guess we would call it. And my role within MacKillop Education, I started off working as an outreach teacher to residential care homes. So I spent a lot of time in that out-of-home care space. But also then kind of moved into the school as a classroom teacher, wellbeing coordinator, and most recently as deputy principal. So I'm very proud to have been able to, be a part of that community in that school, creating safety through, I guess, developing the relate model that we're now kind of talking about today. That's been a big process and a big journey for us all as a team, but very lovely to be a part of. And for the last 2.5 months, I've started my role as the lead Relate consultant and practice specialist with the MacKillop Institute. So now I have the privilege of being able to work with many schools across Australia to support them to enable that sort of cultural change in line with trauma-informed and inclusive practices. Which has been amazing, but a big adjustment from the school environment as well. We really we know a lot from the mountains of research around adverse childhood experiences, and we know, for example, the impact of that on brain development, on social development, on the ability to work within a school setting, and the academic outcomes, unfortunately, are quite a lot lower for many of those students as well. But what we're kind of talking about, and what we speak about in our MacKillop education culture, is that trauma is a much broader concept than just what we quite often talk about, abuse and neglect that children have had to endure. So yes, we're absolutely talking about those children, but we're also talking about things like intergenerational trauma that continues through the ages. We're also talking about it in terms of chronic stress. And when we start to think about that, it broadens the definition of trauma for us. And becomes a very universal concept. So all of us can experience, not just the students in a school, but the adults as well, experiencing, chronic stress at different points in our lives, which makes it really, really important that we're visualizing this and the Relate model in terms of the whole school community and not just supporting the students within it. We also see trauma as a very kind of subjective concept. So what is experienced as traumatic for one person can be experienced in a very different way from another. And the reason for that is we talk about kind of this mix between the internal skills and the external supports that we all hold. And they are different based on lots of our experiences and our relationships throughout our lives. And we're more likely to experience something as traumatic if we have less of the internal and the external supports to cope with a particular situation. So hence we're talking about it as a very, very broad concept that impacts everyone in the community. And also, I guess what we're seeing in our schools is that, there's a whole list there, and it could be a lot longer as well, but we definitely see that students have trouble with developing that sense of safety in the school environment and developing trusting relationships with all the adults and with their peers within that. We see a lot of difficulty with emotional management, regulation, emotional awareness of what's going on for them in terms of the human stress response. So we spend a lot of time on that. It does certainly impact their cognition, their ability to attend to what's going on, working memory, all of those things, executive functions that are needed within a classroom setting. Communication is also hindered, so expressive and receptive can be very difficult for our students. Responding to people with positions of authority and power. Unfortunately, in a school, all adults have a position of authority and power. So how we work with those relationships is really, really important. We're seeing a lot of grief and loss around family situations in particular. Working through changes. I know Matt was talking about this too. Those transitions and understanding what's coming up is really important for our students. So transitions can be very difficult, even just thinking from one task to another, or it could be from outside the school to inside the school environment, for example. We find that positive change and experiencing success can also be really, really difficult for our students. Because that's very much not in line with their kind of internal working model and their understanding of themselves as well. And mental health, I spoke about before, is certainly an increasing concern in our school communities as well. So our school community, so MacKillop Education, very proud to have been a part of it for so long. And down the bottom, you'll see our slogan, actually, so much more than a school. A few years ago, we went through a process because we didn't actually have a slogan for our school. So there was some really kind of awesome groups of parents and students that we got together, and they had these big discussions. And what came out of that was it was really hard for them to put their finger on, but this slogan of MacKillop Education is so much more than a school. So I think about that all the time, and I think, well, what makes it so much more than a school? And it's a really positive and endearing kind of comment to get. But I think I've tried to sum up here in this slide, I guess, the things that our team, our passionate team, are really kind of focused on and strong in. And to start with, the understanding of trauma, adversity, and chronic stress as that broad concept, and constantly growing and working on our understanding of that through different situations is really, really important. We absolutely focus on strong relationships, not just with our students, but with each other as well, and with their families, to make sure that everyone's feeling connected and secure, and really focused on kind of understanding attachment and attunement and the need of that for healing and for the support of our students and families too. We work with, I guess, a really authentic, unconditional, positive regard. So we're able to, there's a genuine care there for our students, regardless of how they're presenting to us. Being able to remove the behaviour of a child from the child themselves, and understanding that we can continue to value them while we're supporting them through a particular behaviour that would have received a lot of kind of negative attention previously they would be used to. We know that accepting the full child, so all the parts of the child, is 100% necessary for any sort of therapeutic change to occur. We also believe, Ross Green's work comes through very strongly, that students do well if they can. Rather than, I guess, the opposite of that, which we, still hear sometimes, students do well if they want to. We don't come to work not wanting to do well, and we believe the same of our students. So they want to do well. If there is a reason that they can't do well, it's probably because we need to look at something in the environment that we need to change to help them, or do they not have the skills to do well to meet an expectation that we're asking of them, for example. So they're the kind of core attitudes that underpin kind of what we're trying to do with our students to help them feel accepted and valued. We come at everything, I guess, through that lens of curiosity and non-judgment. So we're always asking, rather than what's wrong or what's wrong with you, we're asking what happened, what's underlying here that's going on for you, so that I can help you. Our team, I would say, is very open, and we need to be very vulnerable and open with each other in talking about the challenges, because there are many, as you can all understand, and there is courage with that. So it's a courageous culture, I think, and underpinning all of that, we've created that sense of safety to be able to do all of those things. So safety, not just physically, but psychologically, culturally, socially, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things have to come in to create that culture of safety. So when people ask me, why do you do the hard work that you do? Why does your team keep, turning up every day? I'm sure some of you have had those questions as well. I think I've tried to sum it up there on the right there. I'm just really proud to be able to provide, or to be a part of a team that can actually provide a place for students and families where they feel so valued, supported, and safe. And what we're really doing is focusing on that holistic cultural approach. So what we're asking students to do, we're actually doing ourselves as well, because we know what's behind the research, and we know that helps every single person in the school community. We're focused on that relational trust and connection, wholeheartedly, authentically, however those challenges present. And we're really kind of focused on understanding deeply the individual needs of the students that we work with, because we believe that that's the only way that we can really support them forward from, and be able to meet them exactly where they're at and help them move forward from there. So I've tried to, in this presentation, tried to pick out, there are a lot of practices and things that create this culture, but for me, there's three things that I've picked out for us today. Just to give a bit of a brief overview of some of the proactive processes that I think are, or that we think are really necessary to creating such a culture. And the first one is that relate circles. So as a staff team, we would get together every morning and in a really structured way, which can feel clunky at the start, but essentially the relate circle is, being able to hear from everybody. It creates that equality, that connection, that purpose together to start the day, however challenging it might be, and creates that sense of support for each other as well. It's not led by a facilitator or a leader. Everyone is equal in that circle. So it's a democratic, equal process, and everyone is heard, and everyone is vulnerable, and everyone is able to be courageous because that safety is already there. So those 4 questions are really key for us to start the day. So the first one is designed, seems very simple, but we need to focus on continuing our emotional literacy. So we're asking students to do this, as well as doing this ourselves as a team. How are you feeling is really hard to articulate when you've experienced trauma, adversity, or you're in a period of chronic stress. So we're really focusing on keeping that practicing. What's one thing that you want to achieve today? So we're talking about being able to control one thing. Doesn't matter what else is going on. It could be very chaotic. We know in schools, lots of different things are thrown at us and happen and change all of the time. But what's the one thing that I really want to focus on today? And that can be hard when you're in periods of stress as well. The third question, if you need support, who will you ask for help? It's really a lot of people who have experienced adversity and trauma, they tend to feel quite isolated. That's what the research is telling us, and they feel quite ashamed and feel like there's no one there that can help them. So we're really strategically asking people to name someone that can support them if they need help that day. Really important. And then the fourth one, why is what you want to achieve important to you? So that's, I guess, a deeper level of thinking. It's not just a goal that I'm identifying today. It's actually, how does that link with my broader purpose? And sharing that with the team is really important. And then we can do things like in the afternoon, we would also start our staff meetings, for example, with something like this and just adjust the questions. So rather than what's your goal for the day, we might say, what's something you achieved today? And all of a sudden, if you've had a really, really hard day as a team, you're still able to celebrate 25, 30 things that have gone well in that day. And we can leave knowing that something has been a really positive as well. The second thing that I wanted to highlight is our focus on stress and the human stress response. And it's not just for our students. We often mostly talk about it in terms of our students, but it's for us as well. So we do a lot of work with our students and each other around, I guess it's a teaching tool, the regulation plan. That's an example on the left there of one of our students. It was created with the student, refined with the student, and supported until hopefully they can develop the ability to use it themselves independently when they feel stressed, or whatever emotion it is that they've identified. So I guess the theory, tried to put it quite simply here, but we know that a trigger occurs that results in an emotion, and all of the time the student has some sort of a strategy, usually an unsafe one to begin with, that they've learned to deal with that. It's still a strategy, but we want to replace it with something that is safer and more pro-social. So that's where the teaching, that's where the intervention comes in, when we try and encourage them to acknowledge that emotion when it happens before it gets up too high. And we also know that when we're supporting students to do this, and it takes a lot of repetition to help them work through this, we also need the same thing for ourselves. So it's a total parallel process there. On the right there, you'll see my beautiful handwriting, so that is my regulation plan, and we have them on our person at all times. We know that we need our own personal strategies as well. to make sure that we can think as clearly as possible when supporting students in high levels of stress. So that is just as important for us as the student version of that. And thirdly, I think something that is often forgotten when we're talking about supporting students in the classroom is supporting ourselves and our team members as well. So we have, it's pretty normal, I think, in in the out of home care sector or in community services sector to have regular supervision. Not so normal in schools, unfortunately, but that's something that we focus on and we do a lot. So at least once a month, but ongoing as well. So that development of that strong professional supportive relationship with a leader in the school, that is a safe space where we can really delve into reflective practice and develop our, our practice professionally as well, without that threat of, if I'm being honest and saying I wasn't sure what to do in that situation, or I think I froze, or whatever the case may be, which is all really necessary reflection to happen in order to learn and grow, without the threat of that impacting on my job later on. So we want to make sure that that's a really safe space. And a huge part of that is that focus on well-being for the staff. So the stress management that I spoke about earlier, so those regulation plans are constantly reviewed with your supervisor, because we need to make sure that going into high stress situations, they do actually help us to pause, reflect, and come back down to a thinking brain capacity as well. With also a huge emphasis on self-care. So while, stress management and self-care go really, really well hand in hand, they are actually quite separate concepts if you think of them. So the stress management in the moment and the self-care to maintain well-being and also to recover from high stress events. And the focus of those sessions then too is to make sure that self-care plans that are made for staff include all of those different elements. I'm not going to read them to you because they are right in front of you, but there are so many elements to self-care. Quite often we will, name one that we're using all of the time, but there's so much more available to us. And in fact, the body, mind, soul needs so many different things to help keep it nourished and help the well-being flow. So then in the last few minutes, really just focusing on my current position, which is, within the Institute, and now able to bring all of this kind of cultural understanding from the ground and supporting other schools. So what we're doing is bringing together lots of the research that we've gone through in the past few years to create the model that you see in front of you. So it is underpinned by safety in all of its forms, not just physical, and focus very heavily on developing that relational trust. Then we're working on promoting that self-regulation, understanding the human stress response, understanding our own stress response, and using the practical individual strategies to help us to stay calm and able to think clearly and assess situations so that we can keep that safety. We're also drawing on that neuroscience and working on, in terms of learning and teaching environments, creating that structure, that routine, that consistency and predictability that we know is crucial for safety of our young people, but also ourselves. And then lastly, making sure that that organisational change can be sustained to create that kind of sense of collective efficacy for the whole team. And when we're supporting schools, I speak about it as kind of being agile. It's contextualized to the particular school's culture that we're working with. So the beautiful cultures already exist in schools and so many great things are already happening. So Relate, the reframing learning and teaching environments, is not designed to overhaul anything. It's not designed to be an add-on program. It's designed to support the change that the school is actually wanting and needing, based on their already existing goals, their strengths, their challenges, and the uniqueness of that school environment that already exists. And that's why it's quite a long process. And we know to make sustainable change, There's a whole strategic process that needs to be put in place. And that's what the role of, I guess, us Relate Consultants is, to support schools to go through that with our understanding and our experience of how it can look on the ground. So we're looking at understanding that kind of that individual school culture, and we use data to inform that. We also interview and speak with lots of the different people in the school community to really get an understanding of what that culture is. And that starts to develop things like the goals that the school might be wanting to work on moving forward. We provide that professional learning around those 4 foundational concepts, but also adjust the future professional learning to be around what the key implementation team is actually wanting based on the goals that they've set for themselves in each given year of the 3-year stages. The strategic change management I've just spoken about, so the implementation plan that's supported by us as the consultants, and also the providing of strategies and resources to schools. So in line with what they're wanting and needing, there are resources online available to all of the staff within the schools, but also, we've been creating lots of different examples and templates based on the unique situations that the schools are finding themselves in and the challenges that they're needing to overcome. And finally, pretty proud to say that we've already had quite a few schools report some results in some really, really cool areas as well, which these are the areas that we're really targeting. And this is what we're seeing in MacKillop education schools as well. So that increase in trauma-informed practice by the staff and by the leaders. And as a result, I guess the decrease in self-reported stress and fatigue. And where they're not seeing potentially decrease in those areas, we're able to support them and their staff with some strategies around that as well. That has been happening, especially in term 3, as we know is a very interesting term in schools for fatigue. Teachers reporting that greater confidence in responding to challenging behaviours. I think this is something we're hearing a lot. This is one of the biggest stresses for schools and the staff within them. And as a result, the decrease in staff absenteeism as well, which is really nice to see. For the students then, we've seen some progress in their achievement in literacy and numeracy. So hopefully, well, obviously that, that creation of safety has allowed the students to be able to access their learning in a little bit more of a meaningful way, a decrease in critical incidents and an increase in student attendance. So that level of safety and connection, and also feeling a lot more valued. So reporting that they feel heard by the staff that they're working with and within the school community. So that is really exciting. And they're my details, and thank you again for listening. How